I like to think then, as we go live with Captain Pete Bethune, that means we're number one. That's what we're saying, isn't it, Pete? We're number
You
one.
are number one.
Number one with a bullet.
You
That
will
might not
get
be
the
appropriate.
inside story, because you find television these days is they sort of want the surface and a couple of little sound bites, and often the genuine story that's buried underneath that doesn't get sort of seen. So,
Captain Peter Bethune, live from Costa Rica in your boat. What's the name of the boat now? It looks very militarized from your website, like the boat. It's very different from the 80 Gill and the Earthrace. What is the name of the boat?
the name of the boat is Modoc, and was built in 1944 in America, and it was a US Navy ship that served at the end of World War II. Then became a Coast Guard boat, and then started doing tourism and things.
Very cool. You're in your boat at the moment. Back after, I'm just thinking, what's the date today? It's like the 10th-ish, and you got bitten by a pretty serious snake. Boxing Day. It was a good Christmas present, wasn't it?
Yeah, lovely Christmas present, mate. We wandered up the hill. We've got an area that we're going to start doing some patrols in here, and wandered up there with the team, just doing a bit of a reconnaissance mission, and paid the price.
Well, let's do this, because I think the world, literally, probably wants to hear about it. Let me just set up a couple of things, right? So this is where you are now. You're in Costa Rica, which is in that little gap between North and South America. I've just finished watching Long Way Up with Charlie Borman, and they've just been all through this area. It was quite nice to watch that, actually.
Oh, yeah.
and link it in with what you're doing. But I wanted to, and look, first of all, it's almost like a warning for people, a genuine warning for people. I'm gonna show you the snake. Not the literal snake, but the guy who bit you. And there's a picture of what it can do to you. And it's what it can do is pretty grotesque. So fair warning, shut your eyes for 8 seconds if you don't want to see it. But this is the snake and what it can do to people with necrosis. You can see that's a pretty shocking and disgusting leg there that someone obviously who didn't get treatment has had happen to them. But this is the day of your attack. Attack is the right word? Anyway, the day you were bitten. This is you coming out of the jungle on your backside. Obviously, you got carried for some of the way, but there was other places you couldn't get carried. There you are, a little video of you going down on your backside, down a waterfall. And obviously a pretty scary time to be bit by one of the most venomous snakes in the world. It might be the most venomous snake in that area, I think I read.
It's definitely the most deadly snake in Central and South America.
Right.
But I think Africa has a black mamba, I think, which kills a few more.
But I think we need to start, and I wanted to start. I was thinking last night. This sounds a little bit weird, but as boys, sometimes you wonder, gosh, I wonder what it would feel like. You know, you hear about sort of people getting shot. What would it feel like to get shot? And the other thing is I think people often wonder what would it feel like to get bitten by a snake, especially a serious one. Well, you are our unfortunate expert to give us the full lowdown on what it was like being in the jungle that day, what it felt like to get bitten, and the follow-up from it. So, sir, the floor is yours.
So we had the day. So we've got a 1-year agreement with the government here that we provide them support with. We've got a $4 million military UAV. We've got an anti-poaching dog that arrives in about a week. We've got the ship, a Zodiac, a rib, and so a bunch of assets and some personnel with expertise. And so we support the National Park Authority here with those assets and with our crew. And there's a new area up by Piedras Blancas where there's going to be some work happening, and where we're going to be doing some patrols with rangers. And so this is really just a bit of a reconnaissance mission to see what activity was up there. So the problems they have in Costa Rica in their national parks is illegal logging, illegal mining, and wildlife poaching are the three major issues that we would assist them with in terms of trying to address illegal activities. So the plan was we were just going up this area, covering a small amount of the national park to see what activity there was there, and if there was sign of people moving through, sign of dogs in the area, which they normally use dogs for hunting the peccary and other wildlife here. And so I think we probably went up, it was only about 9 o'clock, something like that. And we were hiking up to get on top of the ridge, which would give us a free route to travel around. And generally you find in jungle and bush, the two easy routes to travel. One is up a water course, so a creek bed, river bed, stream bed. And as you get higher, less and less water and generally steeper. The other one is you follow the ridge lines. And we'd kind of gone as far as we could up this riverbed or creek bed before it became problematic. So we were crossing over to the nearby ridge line, which was maybe 150 meters away. So as we were working our way around that thing, I had my crew maybe 20, 30 meters behind me, had a machete and just cutting a path sort of through the bush. And then as I sort of stepped over, there was a bunch of leaf litter. And you tend to be a little bit wary in leaf litter. Like the fer-de-lance snake that got me, they're very prevalent in this jungle here. And I've probably seen about a dozen over the last few years during the patrol. So I knew they were there. But as I stepped in beside this leaf litter, I felt this bang on the back of my leg, on the back of my left calf. And it felt like someone had whacked me with a stick. And sort of, I remember looking down, and here was this snake kind of recoiling away with its sort of rearing up like this with its head. And I remember seeing this thing there sort of with its mouth open and these sort of fangs, and then it sort of backed away like this. And so I took about 4 or 5 steps, and I knew that I'd taken on a bunch of poison. Like straight away the leg started to hit. So I yelled out to the guys, like, "Hey guys, I've been bit by a snake." And I was pretty sure it was a fer-de-lance. Like the fer-de-lance snake, so it's the deadliest form of pit viper. Some people are dead in 10 minutes.
Wow.
Some people can last a day, depending on how much poison they get, whereabouts is the bite, and maybe their health and a few other things. And my immediate thought was I was a dead man. Like we were such a long way from being able to get out. And I knew for me to get out, it was impossible for my crew to carry me. We kind of had 2 options to get out. One is we would get to the very top ridge line, work our way around and back down to the coast. But this would have been probably a 6-hour hike. The second option was we were relatively close to the sea, but we had basically worked all our way down these cliff faces and little river ledges and escarpments. And so it's just sort of just going down all of these things. And so initially I got one of my guys, Alvaro, he put me on his shoulders and he started carrying me. And within about 2 or 3 minutes of this, I was exhausted from just clinging onto this guy. And he was stumbling because it was rocky and steep and ledges and having to climb under vines. And so it was sort of like, no, this is not going to work. And so after that, I remember sort of thinking like maybe we need to go to the ridge line, and I'm looking at the GPS and I can see how far it is. So I remember thinking, man, maybe it's easier I just start crawling. And so I tried on my belly, but my bad leg basically dragged. Now I know one of the keys to me surviving this is the leg needs to be immobilized, but I also need to make my way down. And so initially the leg just kept dragging and bumping. So I flipped over onto my arse, and I put my sort of bad leg forward pointing out, and then I had my good leg moving like this, and my 2 hands kind of just shuffling along on my bum. And I went maybe 50 or 60 meters, and I remember thinking, like, this is kind of doable, and just started carrying on. But over the first probably hour, through that entire time, I remember thinking my day is up, like I'm going to get halfway down here. Because I'm expending all this energy to get out, and because I'm moving the leg, and the leg is forever getting bumped and banged, and every time I bumped it was like really, really sore, and I could feel, so that the initial bite was in the middle of my calf, and I could feel the pain spreading out as I'm using this leg to go crawling down, and as it's getting bumped. And then after about, so we start, but we were making reasonable kind of progress. So we were going down these little waterfalls and stuff like that. And then after about an hour and a half, maybe, I started to get sleepy. And initially it started that my heart started sort of palpitating. So I could feel my heart go boom, 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 boom. And it would go really, really fast. And then it would start dropping down really, really low. And then the fast bits kind of stopped. And my heart was like slow. And I just wanted to go to fucking sleep. And this is one of the, I remember sort of thinking like, you know, is this my number finally up? I'm just going to fall asleep in the middle of the bush 2 miles from getting out or something. And my crew, I think by this stage, I was with just one of my crew. The other 2 had gone out to try and get the Coast Guard to be meeting us when we got out. And so the guy who's with me is like, Bethune, you better keep awake, boy. And I remember just thinking, I just wanted to sort of crawl up in this little heap, and he would give me a little nudge and I'd carry on. And I started going slower and slower. And then after maybe about 2.5 hours, I could hear some voices in the distance. Next thing, two of my team members came back. There was 2 Coast Guard guys. And by now we'd kind of gotten down the worst of the steep bits. So one of the guys put me over his shoulder, carried me back, carried me maybe 100 meters, swapped it to another guy, swapped it to one of my team members. So probably the last 400 or 500 meters, they were just swapping me from person to person to get out at that last distance. And we got down to the beach. The Coast Guard boat was a little distance away from where we were. They laid me down on the ground, and I remember just crawling up in the ball, and my leg was so sore. By now the pain is from my foot all the way up to my groin. And I remember just lying down on these pebbles. I had my eye. I remember looking down and seeing these little wee pebbles there and thinking, I'm just going to go to sleep here. They put me in the Coast Guard boat, and I have no recollection of the Coast Guard voyage. I do remember it's probably about a 20-minute run, but I don't remember any of it. But I do remember them pulling me out of the Coast Guard vessel, putting me in the ambulance. And then I remember getting to the hospital where they chopped my clothes off and started treatment.
So, so a couple of questions, right? So 2.5 hours on your ass and being carried. What distance would that have been? Like how far? How many Ks would that have been that it took you to do that 2.5 hours, do you think?
I reckon 2.5.
Okay. So you go cruising along at a K an hour on your backside sort of thing. Obviously, you said the Coast Guard boat, was it waiting for you? Did that get called in, or were you already working with them?
Yeah, when this is one of the best things to come out of this was my team was outstanding in managing this. Like within 10 minutes of the bite, my engineer Alvaro, he'd spoken with the Coast Guard, and he'd spoken with emergency services, and he'd spoken with the Red Cross. And the emergency services had given some pretty, they gave good advice. Like, you think you know how to deal with a snake bite, but then it helped give us some assurance about immobilize the leg. Don't go walking on it. Don't go banging it. Anything you could do to stop that. And so there was some good advice came through. They emphasized the need to get to the hospital as quickly as you can. And so that was kind of the dilemma for us. Do we go the slow road?
Yeah.
Do we walk all the way around the ridge and take 5 or 6 hours, but along a route where I could be carried? Or do we go the Cook route, which was more treacherous? Like some of those waterfalls, my guys ended up with scratches and bruises from slipping and falling down and things like that. But in the end, I remember thinking, and Alvaro was the same. He said, we need to go straight down. Peter's not going to see the other side of this.
So I'm doing the maths in my head. 2.5 hours on your backside, 20-minute boat ride. I'm guessing 10 minutes in the ambulance. So say 3 hours after the bite, you were in the hospital.
That's correct.
And I'm going to bring another image up here. I'm not sure which day this is, but for people who are watching, you can see there is a pretty, what would that be, 3 or 4 times size normal leg as you are. Oh gosh, what am I doing there? Sitting in the hospital looking at that leg. As an example of one of the photos that went out, when that was obviously days after it actually happened, because you're chilling there in your lovely cut-off blue shorts. But so you're 3 hours in hospital, 3 hours to hospital. Then what?
When I got to the hospital, there was a handover where the Red Cross said what they knew. Alvaro, my engineer, he gave what had happened from his perspective, some times. It would be noting the times in that along the way, because we knew that was part of the thing. So there was this handover. They did an initial and they wanted to see the photo of the snake before they gave me the fer-de-lance.
Right.
Antidote. They wanted to make sure that this is the right snake, and we'd taken a photo of the snake, so they confirmed, that is a fer-de-lance. They did a allergy test on 2 different compounds. So they put a little scratch on your arm, put a drop of the anti-venom to make sure you're not going to react to that. They cut all my clothes off. So I remember the boot, my left boot hurt like so much when they pulled that boot off. And I remember, like, it takes a little bit for me to cry. Man, my streaming down my face as they tried to pull this boot off my leg. And then I think pretty soon after that, they put me on morphine. They end up with 4 lines in. So one of them is the anti-venom, and that goes in per ampule. There's the morphine, so I'm not feeling anything. There was antibiotics, and there was saline. So those are the 4 things that they started to feed in me. They drew the lines on the leg, and they take a measurement. So one of the ways they monitor your progress or otherwise on this is your leg still expanding? Is it remaining the same, or is it contracting? And this became a key part of the treatment. So now the challenge for the doctors, they need to start putting enough anti-venom in me that deals to the poison, but such that it doesn't compound my problems. Because the anti-venom itself is a very toxic compound as well. Not as toxic as the poison, and you're putting effectively one poison in your body that is hopefully going to deal to the more potent one.
Yep.
So they put the measurements around my leg, and then the next thing I knew was like maybe 12 hours later, just sort of coming out of this sort of stupor and looking around, and my leg had grown. And so what they did with those measurements was every 12 hours they would get in, they would make another measurement to see is each part growing. And what was happening was initially the calf was quite big, and then the swelling just moved all the way up right to my groin. And so they initially put in, I think it was 7 or 8 ampules of anti-venom, and but my leg continued to swell. And then they put in some more. Low battery. Can you make sure that thing is charging, mate? All right. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
So they put 7 or 8 ampules in. Then the reaction continued going. So my leg is continuing to get worse and worse. They put in another 3, and then another batch to take it to 15. And the doctor afterwards, he said it is the most he's ever seen put in on a patient, 15 ampules in total. But he said it was necessary because of how much poison you must have taken. And I think he explained too the fact that my leg had done so much sort of exercise and work and bumps and getting down, the poison was well through my body. Whereas if the poison is localized, the treatment is they don't need to go putting as much in because of all the action seems to happen in one area. So that was by about day 4 was when my leg reached the maximum. By now they've finished the treatment, and now it's just a matter of waiting. And so the leg was right on the edge of them sending me to a larger hospital to contain or to cut the leg open because of the swelling. So what happens is if a limb gets too expanded or too much swelling, you run the risk of the leg becoming toxic and dying on you. Anyway, we were right on the edge of having the leg opened up to relieve some of that pressure. But thankfully, they said I was a centimetre away. So the one that really concerned them was at the top of the thigh, and they said that was 1 centimetre away from being operated. So then after that, it stabilised for about a day. The swelling remained the same. And then after that, it started going down. And initially in the thigh, and then eventually my calf is still quite fat. It's sort of like I've got a baby out the side of it now. So anyway, I think after about maybe day 5 or 6, the doctors basically said, look, we think you're out of trouble. But then things got a bit complicated where I was unable to pee, and the doctors don't know whether this is a function of the anti-venom or whether there was something that the venom had done to me or is it an allergic reaction. They weren't really sure. But anyway, I was unable to pee. I was still on high dose of not morphine now, another sedative, and I didn't know that I wasn't able to pee. And my bladder it's called distended, where your bladder's normally like this little bag that shrinks and opens up. And what happened was a normal male bladder is 700 mils. Mm-hmm. They drained out of me 2.5 litres.
Wow.
So now my bladder's all mixed up. So my bladder's like this. Now it's lost its spring. And so the following week, the treatment was basically to get on top of the infection in my bladder, which may have caused the initial problem, or it might have been a function of the distended bladder, which is now injured and that sort of thing. And so that took another week. to get on top of that, where they could make me leave or have me leave the hospital safely. So I think I did 2 weeks in the hospital. I still have a catheter in my side, so when I go to bed at night, I've got this little wee bag. It's like an American might have a 6-shooter sitting on his hip. I've kind of got a little wee bladder bag stuck on my leg. Well, last night I had a bit of an accident and a thing that leaked in my bed, which I wasn't too thrilled about. But anyway, I've got this bag. So now what's happening is my bladder is hopefully coming back to like a normal size. And normally if your bladder gets distended, give it enough time, it'll come back to a normal size. And then you just got to train it to be able to expand and contract in a normal kind of size and fashion, you know. So that's ongoing treatment. I'm hopefully getting the catheter removed in 3 or 4 days. And the other treatment I have is my left leg is very weak now. I went for a walk yesterday. I think I walked about 2 kilometers. But the bit that hurt was my cock, actually, because part of this was I've had so many catheters in and out of my cock, mate, and it's all kind of scratched on the inside. So that's the bit that hurts the most at the moment. The calf is very tight when I walk on it. At the end of the step, as the sort of heel gets to the edge, it's really, really tight. And so now part of my rehab is I walk, and hopefully in a week or 2 I can do a gentle jog on it and just get that muscle used to working again and getting it stretched so that it's got a reasonable amount of movement.
I saw.
And that is the medical history of the snake bite.
I don't know how many times we've had the word cock mentioned in the podcast, but that's good. It's always good to break new boundaries, isn't it? I think I saw TVNZ the day you were released, and as I looked at you coming out of the hospital, there was footage, and I went, "Wow, that leg looks atrophied." But I don't know actually, now that I think about it, whether it was the leg that was bitten, because the camera reverses things sometimes, that it atrophied, or the other leg was still big. But when you're saying that it's tight, etc., is there physical damage to the size of your calf muscle that there was before you were bitten?
Yeah. There is some long-term damage there. On a couple of days before I got out of hospital, they took me to a physio, and they would run this electrode over your leg that would stimulate the muscles and stimulate the skin. And there's a couple of dead zones in the leg where there's just no muscle action, whatever.
Right.
And it tends to be, so a normal calf is kind of shaped like this. Mine has a little bulb out the side, and in the middle of that is this dead zone. So it's a little bit like the muscle has changed its shape a little bit, and I can feel that when I try and exercise it. Like, it just feels a completely different kind of muscle now, and there's dead tissue inside of that. And on the other side of the muscle, when I run my finger down, there's this big gap in there. Like it's like fluid. So I can push my finger into this gap, and I can feel the fluid kind of moving away. And so I think in time, I suspect that will compress up. So the dead tissue might end up being just scar tissue. Some of it may end up being expelled by my body eventually. It'll be dead tissue, and the body gets rid of it. So that is yet to transpire, exactly what's going to happen to the leg, but I've got enough movement that I'm not an invalid. I can walk around okay at the moment, and I think with what I've seen thus far, I think jogging and hiking is going to become reasonable in the future. I doubt I'll ever be able to do a 100-meter dash, but those days are long gone anyway, mate.
I was just thinking, you're talking about those days long gone, that reference to age and stuff. As a man now in my 40s, the idea of a distended, expanded bladder might be kind of helpful in the overnight thing. The overnight toilet trips have just sort of started for me, and I'm wondering a bigger bladder might be useful in some ways as well. Perhaps.
I would recommend against it, because the bigger bladder doesn't have as much spring in it. So
okay.
My understanding is it doesn't work, mate.
All right.
Stick to your small bladder, right. You're all good.
All right. Okay, so I'm sure that you and your mates and your guys who are on your boat and that have all had like boy conversations so far, you know what boys are like. They're like, oh, it's a snake, it's so cool. On some level, this is going to be So my boy question is this, right? Now that you've been bitten, I was going to say, are you somewhat impervious to the snake? It's not that. But if you were to be, like, let's say once you're fully healed, if you were to be bitten again because you've had this venom through your body, would you react better, worse, or would it make no difference at all? Do you have any idea?
That is a good question, and I do not know the answer to that.
All right, because I was thinking, if your body's already, even though there was anti-venom, your body's fought this venom once. Wondering, it's like when you get. I'm not saying you were inoculated from the bite, but that's basically what getting the influenza jab sort of is. It's a
it's an interesting question. We've been talking. The guy who develops the anti-venom, he's in San Jose, which is the capital in Costa Rica. He supplies this anti-venom to all of the countries in Central and South America,
right.
And he is the guru on the fer-de-lance snake bite. And he started advising on our case when things got complicated in the middle of it. He stepped in, and part of it, there was a movement at one stage to shift me to another hospital because they didn't believe we were getting the right treatment there. And this doctor stepped in and he said, "No, you're in the best place in the country because those guys deal with the most snake bites." But anyway, so he was helping on the case in terms of advising. Once the doctors went over 10 ampules, they actually called him up to say, "Look, like this guy's already had 10 ampules. Are we safe to go putting in more?" And he was the one who said, "Like, let's go up to 15 and hope for the best kind of thing." I will send him an email. He's a guy who doesn't have a phone, but he replies to emails. I'm going to send him an email and ask him the question, and I will let you know in due course whether I do have antibodies to it, whether I can handle a fer-de-lance snake bite without issue.
I'm sure no one's suggesting without issue, but I was just wondering if it makes you I was going to say the next time it happens, please God no. But if it was to happen again, would your body be able to handle it better? No one's suggesting you're a superhero, Pete. Don't go thinking that, mate, at all.
No, good, mate.
Why did you survive this? I mean, you said, not meant to be too heavy with the question, but you said that these bites sometimes kill people in 10 minutes. Why, when it took you 3 hours to get to the hospital, and as the doctors told you took a big hit of venom, why did you, Pete Bethune, make it through this? And I'm talking physically, or if there's more to it. I had a guy on the other day who was talking about being hit by box jellyfish, and he attributes it to a spiritual experience for him. But why did you survive this after a 3-hour delay to get antivenom?
That is a good question. One of the things with the fer-de-lance snake is they adjust the amount of venom. So often the worst snake bites are small snakes because they don't understand the importance. Here's the thing with a snake. This is this reptile that has very little stored energy in its body. For it to get action in the day, it comes out, finds a little bit of sun, it's got to warm up, it's got very little fat. And so snakes are very conscious or instinctively they want to preserve their energy. Now, for a snake to go spitting out a whole bunch of poison, that is a loss for that snake.
Right.
It has taken a whole bunch of energy for it to make that poison. Smaller snakes tend to put out more poison because they haven't kind of clicked onto this thing, whereas larger snakes will often, especially if it's a defensive move. So the fer-de-lance snake is very territorial, and particular times of the year, they will always be in the same place, which is their little hunting ground. And part of the reaction of them is, stay out of my space. If those snakes, very often a big snake will come out and it will even put in zero venom, none at all. It will simply come in and bang you. Now, in my case, the snake was medium, like maybe 4.5 feet, something like that, which was in the middle. It can depend where the bite is. So if you get a bite where the venom can pass into your veins in an easy way, then you've suddenly got this transported through your body much faster.
Right.
And it gets up to your heart region and you're a dead man. So in my case, I was lucky in that I don't believe it was near any arteries or significant veins. And the movement in the poison was simply the function of me having to use the leg as little as I could, but still having to use it.
So the poison went more into the muscle rather than the bloodline, is what you're saying?
That's correct.
Yeah, wow. I never thought of that before, but that's a fascinating. And when you see that picture that we showed earlier, which I'm not going to bring up again, of the person with the worst case scenario necrosis and a leg that's almost disappeared, that's because it's eating up the muscle, but it hasn't necessarily got into the bloodstream to get to the heart, like you're saying.
That's correct. So one of the common end results of this is loss of limb, loss of a foot, a leg, a hand. There was one guy who I met in the hospital. His brother lost a finger. He took a bite on the end of his thumb. and he showed us a photo of his thumb that was black, and then they end up cutting his thumb off. And so that necrosis or sort of body death is a common result of the fer-de-lance snake. And in my case too was nowadays they don't recommend this, but my guys sucked out quite a bit of venom. So Alvaro, who's my engineer, he kind of took command of the operation. Once I was sort of incapacitated, he took over, and you see this in the movies where they chop out a piece of flesh with the wound in it or whatever. Anyway, he got down and he is adamant he sucked out a heap of venom.
Wow.
And you could, like, there was still, like, you could see the two blood marks where the two fangs went in, and he sort of squeezed it and sucked. And I do remember, like, excruciating pain when he did this. But at the same time, like this is probably doing me good. I don't know. These days with snake bites, they recommend you don't do that, and that they worry about the bacteria from your saliva. Now you've introduced an additional sort of thing, but in my case, a bit of someone's saliva, and by getting rid of even a little tiny bit of poison, I'll take that gamble. So Alvaro, he's adamant because he remembered the first suck he didn't get. All it tasted was salty, and then he said there was this very acidic kind of thing, like a maybe mixed with some lemon juice or something, like very very acidic stuff that came out. And normally if you ever got a cut and you go licking your wound, it's salty from the blood. He said this is not salt, this is something entirely different sort of thing. So I suspect that probably helped my cause. And when I look back on it, like, for me to survive this thing, the key of it was me getting down to that water. And my guys did an outstanding job getting me to the water. Coast Guard was there waiting half an hour later in the hospital. And I remember when I got to the hospital, so I was doing the sleepy thing now, right? I'm just wanting to go to sleep. The doctors, when it was a couple of days later, when they removed me from what's called the shock ward, and the doctor came and saw me, and he said basically, another hour and you would have been gone.
Wow.
So I've looked death in the eye. I've come out the other side, mate.
Now, I'm actually going to ask you about that in a second, but the first thing, just to check up, you're talking about people who have that necrosis and lose a finger or lose a whatever. Now that you're out, now that there's no chance of that still happening, or is there still sort of a danger that something could happen and your injury could go downhill from here?
The injury could go downhill, but my ship is anchored up half a kilometre from shore. I could be in a hospital in 20 minutes. So things may turn for the worst, but for me to go losing this limb or something now, I'd be highly surprised.
Okay, so you're an action man, right? You sort of look like a G.I. Joe as well. You're kind of an action man. You're out there. You're running through the bush. You're in days gone by, you've been screaming around the world record paces in boats. You've been fighting, whalers in the Southern Oceans. You've done a TV program that's almost, is it called Operation? What was it called? Not Operation. But the Operatives, but it was almost like a SEAL team type look to it. So you have a bit of a reputation, or at least a look or a feel or a vibe of certainly an action man. Yet in this moment that you've been bitten, all of that goes away, other than obviously the physical prowess that's given you. But you're now going down the water for 2.5 hours, and all you've got is to get back to the boat and your thoughts. And I'd really like to know what your head did, what your brain did, your thoughts of your mortality, what all that was like after you realize you've been bitten by one of the most poisonous snakes in the world, and your X amount of hours from getting help. What's going through your head? What are you thinking?
One of the things with if you look at the things I've done over the last sort of 10 or 12 years, there's been a number of occasions where myself or my team has been under genuine threat of being killed or maimed. We got run over by the Japanese whalers, for example. My team's been shot at multiple occasions. Like last time I got shot at was in the Philippines. And I got knifed in Brazil, of course, a couple of years ago too, that was a close call for me. So I've experienced a few occasions where I've sort of thought my number might be up. And I wouldn't say there's a desensitization to it, but I've got the ability to think rationally under those conditions. And when Alvaro and I sat down and we're looking at a phone and looking at the GPS, like I'm trying to, like I'm shaking my leg or something, but I'm just trying to think, what is a good decision to make here? And this is part of my job. Like if you look at good boat captains who are involved, let's say in boarding illegal fishing vessels, your team is looking to you to make good decisions. And so I'm trying to, and one side of my mind is saying like this, 10 minutes and you might be curled up in a ball, or it might be hours and you're curled up in a ball. So that side is nagging at me. And then this other side is saying, you need to make a good decision here. And this is where Alvaro was amazing in terms of saying, right, we need to go now. And that was his call, not mine. And so I'm starting to feel a little bit of confidence that, like Alvaro's in command here, because later on, all I wanted to do was kind of go to sleep. And so then I remember, I sent one of my guys down early to go down and make sure the Coast Guard boat knew where to pick us up. So just still trying to make good decisions. And once we made the call to go down these ravines and stuff, we were committed. And there was a risk in this that we came to a waterfall that we couldn't get down. Mm-hmm. And so we may go all of the way down here and then find it's actually impassable. Now we've got to climb all the way back up here. So in the back of my mind, there's this nagging thing about there may be a waterfall here that we cannot get down. But I remember being surprised when I started crawling on my arse. I remember I did about the first 50 or 60 meters and I stopped and I looked back and sort of thought, man, this is actually not too bad. And after that, it was just a matter of focusing right the next waterfall. Okay, we'll work our way down there. So it was kind of almost like one step at a time. And, an hour and a half later, and I'm looking at my phone, and we're now halfway down. And so I'm thinking, hey, shit, I'm still alive and kicking. And so gradually I started to think there was a greater chance of me getting out of this alive. And then the last half hour was where things started to descend again. And this is where I was just getting so tired, I would go at times maybe crawl only 5 meters on my butt and then stop. And I've got Jack sitting there, Pete, you need to keep going. You need to keep going, mate. And then when we just got down to the flats was when the Coast Guard guys, and the relief for me when I saw the Coast Guard guys, because I knew then we had the capacity to carry me. We'd reached the level where they could put me on the shoulder, and even though there were rocks and stuff, they'd still be able to sort of carry me out, screaming and holler and and from that point I don't remember so much other than just being super sleepy. And at one stage I remember thinking, like, I'm okay if I die with this. I've been very lucky in my life, eh? And I if I was to curl up and die at that point, and kind of that was kind of where my head got to. I just want to go to sleep. I've had enough of this, but I'm okay with that.
It's a pretty nice place to be if you can look death in the face and potentially think this is the end and be happy with your lot. That's what I hear you saying.
Here's the thing. I gave a TED talk a couple of years ago. This was after I got knifed in Brazil, and the basis of my talk was basically you need to stand up for something in your life. And I think if you look at the price the world pays for every one of us, so you sitting there in your little podcast saying the world is paying a price for you in terms of land, in terms of food, in terms of water, in terms of clothing, all of these things the planet pays a price. And I sort of have this attitude, like there's an obligation for us to pay this back. And it may not, I sort of encourage people, it doesn't need to be the environment. If you want to pick human rights as your issue, or you want to pick female circumcision in Sudan, or you want to pick an issue and own that issue, and you make a positive contribution in the world. And the tragedy of all this is most of society long ago got sucked into buying a car, buying a refrigerator, having a holiday home. I'm going to buy myself a big plasma screen now. We've all been sold this false narrative about you're going to be happier if you've got this new fucking car. And so what I try and encourage people to say is, like, life is more than that. And if all you do at the end of your life is raise children. Like, that is not enough. In fact, I gave a talk a few years ago. There was a group, it was like a CEO function, and they dragged me in to come in and give them a motivational speech. And I went around the group and I pointed at everyone and I said, you tell me, what are you most proud of in your life? And the first guy says, oh, I've got 2 amazing daughters. I was like, fuck, you know, the world's got 8 billion people. Really? Is this the best you can come up with? Like, is the world a better place with you having been in it? And I went to the next guy and he was sort of like, well, I've got a business and I employ 150 people. And I was like, well, that's simply a function for you to make money, you know. And so I tried to sort of use this argument. The world pays a price for you to be in it. You better pay the world back. And you need to find something that you contribute to and help to that is bigger than just yourself. And most people, they genuinely sit back and think about, what have I achieved in my life? And I use it today. Every time I get a new crew member, I give them a couple of days to settle in. And I say, what are you proudest of? And sometimes the answers are it's a bit unfair. I'm going to say pathetic. Like, really, is that your best achievement? You managed to pass an exam? And, you know, if they're 20 years old, it's understandable. They haven't really had a chance. But you ask the same question to someone who's 60, and their greatest achievement is they've got a big house. You know, like, this is not an achievement. And so when I look at, I started this transition in about 2005 when we started building the boat Earthrace. And we ran this boat on biodiesel, and we used it as a promotion for renewable fuels. And since then, there's so many things that I'm super proud of. And whaling in Antarctica. So our boat got run over. I ended up doing 5 months in prison in Japan. But it was the key year for the anti-whaling movement. It put a lot of pressure on New Zealand and Japan. They took Japan to the International Court of Justice. Japan lost the court case. It took about 6 or 7 years for it to reach its fruition. Japan withdrew from Antarctica. Now, I don't claim sole responsibility for Japan ceasing whaling, but I was a key player in the middle of the key campaign that did ultimately lead to Japan ceasing whaling in Antarctica. And there's not many people who can claim that. Yeah. And then, but the after that, there's this dilemma. Like, you know, I want to be involved in conservation. How are you going to do that? And how are you going to fund your work? And it's like you doing your podcast, mate. How do you go funding your work? And the challenge in conservation is your client is an animal or a piece of jungle or a stretch of water. They don't have any money. So the dilemma is, how are you going to make money to pay for your work? So in my case, I came up with this idea of a TV show. And one of the things that happened when we were in Antarctica, they filmed a show called Whale Wars.
Yeah, I remember it.
And it rated, the season I was in, rated enormously in North America. And that was part of the pressure that kind of forced the two governments to take action. And one of the things that the final episode, when I boarded the Shonan Maru off the back of a jet ski in the night, remains the highest ever rating episode in Animal Planet history.
Wow.
And it was a great lesson for me about, you know, man, if people want to watch that stuff, maybe I can put together a team of guys and do hardcore missions. And so the transition into using military guys wasn't because I wanted to be G.I. Joe. It was, I saw it as a way to go funding my work. And if I could get a bunch of military guys, and here's the thing, for good television, there needs to be a journey. There needs to be some kind of narrative that takes people on, oh, here we go, you know, it's easy, oh no, trouble, problems, and then ultimately you're successful or otherwise. So the television kept me funded for about 5 or 6 years. There was a guy who had won lotto. He lived over in a little beach town, and I talked him into giving me $500,000, or invested in the show actually.
Cool.
So I got $500,000 there. I won a court case with Sea Shepherd, who owed me $500,000. That gave me $1 million. Here's something that's kind of changed to me. When I first started Earthrace, I spent most of my time trying to convince other people to give me money. And I still had a nice house, a stainless refrigerator, the normal trappings. I had a forestry investment. I had some shares. When I left school, I worked in the oil industry, and I was making about $250,000 a year. So I had a bit of money tucked away. But I left it to the side, and I kept trying to get this other money. And we got partway through the build of the boat, ran out of money. And so then I'm sitting there looking at my forestry block. Do I sell that? And gradually, my wife, to her credit, she was amazingly supportive. Like, we basically mortgaged and sold everything we had so that I could follow this dream of building this very cool boat and using it in a positive way. point I'm getting at was when it came round to doing the television show, I'm all in already. See you, Miguel. Thanks, mate. Corcovado. Sorry about that. I've just got Miguel, who's the local Menai Ranger with us.
All good.
And he's heading off now. So anyway, when it came time to make the show happen, I never questioned putting that $1 million in. You know, I've just won a court case with $500,000, and a month later, it has all been dumped in on filming this crazy-ass show in Costa Rica. But I'm okay with that. Like, I've kind of changed my perspective about money. These days, in terms of assets, I own virtually nothing. I've got some tactical gear. I've got a few firearms. I had a few military-style firearms. Man, did I make good money out of those and that buyback thing that just happened back in New Zealand. I had an old AK-47. I'd never fired a round through it. I think I got $3,000 for that thing. I only paid $750 for it. And then I had two AR-15s. And one of the things with our work, sometimes firearms might be involved in some capacities. I try and avoid it these days, but when we're filming the operatives, there was a few times when they sort of became a little bit necessary. So anyway, I've gone on, managed to get the show together and used that to fund my work. And if you look at the stuff my team has achieved, and I don't claim this as my achievements, it's always been a team that does this. I'm the lucky guy in the middle of it. But we closed down 2 wildlife smuggling rings in Asia. One of them was smuggling pangolin. Another one was smuggling forest turtles. We rescued a dolphin that was being held illegally in an island resort in Indonesia. We stole this dolphin in the middle of the night, took it to an island about 50 kilometres offshore, released it in this little lagoon, had it on rehabilitation for a couple of months, released it back into the wild. I've closed down 2 illegal gold mining rings. We've exposed numerous illegal logging operations and been involved in closing down some illegal logging operations. A lot of this work, when I talk about this, some of it's in us doing our own thing. One example, and some of it's illegal. So I tend to shy away from that these days. But in the early days, the first episode we did, so I had this idea to do this television show, right, to go doing badass stuff and make people aware of conservation issues. So there's this thing in Namibia where they club seals. So baby seals, they will kill about 100,000 of them a year. It happens in 2 places. One place is called Cape Cross in the north of Namibia. The second place is in Lüderitz, inside a De Beers diamond mine. So our mission became sneak into a De Beers diamond mine and covertly film the seal clubbing. And this, if you were to talk to my team today and say, what is the coolest mission you ever did? The 2 they would come up with is the dolphin rescue and the seal clubbing. At this stage, no one has ever filmed the seal clubbing. Like, it's completely under the conservation radar. I only knew about it because there was a conservationist in Namibia who called me and said, hey, I hear you're starting to do some cool stuff after Sea Shepherd. Could you come and help out here? And so we went in, I had myself and one other guy. We spent 3 days sneaking around through this diamond mine. There's these patrols going around and we're sneaking around, trying to stay hidden, trying to figure out where the seal clubbing happens. So we looked at the place on Google Earth, and when we got there was no damn seals. So we started having a hike around this diamond mine, making sure that no one saw us and trying to find out where are these baby seals. Eventually we found them. Then on the last day, basically out of food, out of water, and these guys came to within about 50 metres of us and clubbed probably 400 or 500 seals. And we ended up, the footage wasn't amazing. My cameraman, he abandoned me. So when we first went in the diamond mine, so I've got this cameraman, he's done 5 seasons of Deadliest Catch.
Wow.
And for you to get into this place, you're swimming. We took the Zodiac to about a kilometre offshore. So we've got to swim in the middle of the night. This is one of the 2 places in the world where white sharks breach, catching the seal. So they come shooting out of the water, grabbing the seal. One of only 2 places in the world that happens. Anyway, so we swimming through this water, and then we end up in this kelp bed that we couldn't see on Google Earth. So we're stuck inside this kelp bed trying to battle our way through this stuff, get to shore. And so we're just getting ourselves. So there's me, a New Zealand paratrooper, and the cameraman. And then we hear this, and we turn around, and there's these 2 jackals dragging my cameraman's bag away. And so he had inside his bag, he had some biltong. And anyway, I think the jackals just smelled that. So then he goes up to grab his bag off these 2 little jackals. And they're quite small little animals. But one of them saw it, like this at him. And he's like, oh, boy. And so he's like, Bethune, I'm not doing this. And so in the end, we had Larry waiting offshore in the Zodiac. So this cameraman, he packs up his bag and heads on. So after that, all it is me and Jack with one camera pointing it at ourselves and doing our best. And the footage of the seal clubbing, it wasn't the most steady footage you'll ever see, but it became a great part of the story. And that, the fact that the cameraman left us became part of the story. So we put that together as the pilot episode. Got them $1 million, came to Costa Rica, filmed a season here, managed to sell the show. I think that first season sold in about 60 countries. That gave me a bit more money for the next round. Next round, we went to Asia and did the missions I talked about before, where we closed the wildlife smuggling rings and caught it was a Vietnamese boat we caught with 15 ton of illegally taken fish. There was some Chinese boats and lots of stuff. So that was funded by the television show. Then there's eventually a US network. So in terms of television, as a general rule, about 50% of your money comes from the States. And that was the case for us.
Right. A
season was worth about $2 million to us. The US market was worth $1 million and another $1 million from the other 90 odd countries that bought the show. A US network closed down, and that kind of saw the end of that show, really. And so that was a few years ago now. Then there's that challenge of, Pete Bethune, what are you going to do now? I still want to be involved in conservation. My show's kind of done its deed. And so through that period of running the show, I'd made a few contacts. One of them was the CEO of Schiebel. Schiebel make military UAVs. They cost about $4 million. And at one stage, I was staying with the CEO's place in Klagenfurt in Austria. And he says, Pete, if I was to give you one of these drones, what would you do with it? And these drones are next level, mate. Like, I can fly this 200 kilometers from my ship and have live video back to my boat. Weighs 200 kilos. You put an extended fuel tank, 9 hours flight time. It's got a dash speed over 100 knots.
Wow. You
can loiter at about 55 knots. You can fly to 12,000 feet. The payload on it, the camera system, the main one we use is $500,000. So I can sit at 4,000 feet and zoom right in on an illegal fishing boat. And so this has become a key asset for us. So this guy's saying, I'll give you the drone. What are you going to do with it? And so I knew, like jungle stuff, I can detect illegal gold miners, I can detect all sorts of things using this thing. But then I needed a platform to run it from. And there was another guy that I'd been talking to who, I wouldn't say a genuine big hitter, but he was convinced enough in what I do to basically loan me a big chunk of money to buy the ship. And that is how I got the Modoc boat that I'm based on now. So I have this ship. I have this $4 million military UAV sitting down in a little hangar. And we provide those assets and some others to the ranger teams here in Costa Rica. So the plan is we've got a 1-year agreement here. Then we've got a few other countries have asked us to go and help them. So we've got Colombia and Isla de Mapeo, which is one of the top 10 dive sites of the world. They've got a problem with Chinese boats around there at the moment, saying, can you come and help there? So the plan at the moment, we've probably got most of this year in Costa Rica, and then we'll start heading south and hopefully do some good down there.
The boat that you've got, which I'll bring up on screen now for people who can see it, that's the Modoc, obviously. Is this the drone you're talking about, the little white guy on the back, or is that a submersible?
Yeah, that is the drone.
That's the drone there. It looks massive. 4
meters long.
Yeah. Wow.
It's an impressive bit of kit, mate, and it's intimidating. So for us to be able to fly this, is my engineer, he's had 5 months training. I've had 2.5 months training in Austria. It's not like a little DJI, you pick it up and get the thumb moving away you go. Like, this thing is very complicated to fly, and it takes a lot of concentration and a lot of pre-flight. So for us to fly this, if we're doing a 1 hour flight, there's probably 2-3 hours of preparation before you even get this thing off the ground.
Out of interest, completely, it's kind of side conversation. The people who called you in Namibia, the conservationists there, didn't happen to be the guys from Ocean Conservation, were they?
No.
No.
It was a lady who. One of the neat things about conservation, you get to meet a lot of passionate people who, I talked before about finding a cause, and a lot of people might find a cause, and we all kind of bumble along in our own way and contribute in our own way. And these days, often you find this cannibalism within the conservation movement,
Yeah.
where people sort of start attacking the conservationists next to them because they might, competing for the same funding and whatever. I have respect for anyone who gets out there and starts contributing things. So anyway, this lady, she'd been documenting the seal clubbing, and she'd done quite a lot of work in the courts trying to get the permits for the seal clubbing. There was evidence of corruption between the Minister of Fisheries and the guy who had the license. So she'd been running court action. So she was the one who called us over there, and I still have contact with her occasionally. She's sort of slowed down on a few things these days, but often I get a lot of emails from people saying, "Hey, how about you come here and work on this?" And most of them are dead ends. But I've learned over the years, every now and then there's something that is worthy of our time. One of them was the pangolin. So the pangolin. Oh, sorry, just lost you there. So the pangolin is the most trafficked mammal in the world. This lady called me up and she said, "Oh, what are you doing about the pangolin? I know you guys are based in the Philippines for the next 3 months, and I'd never even heard of this thing." And in the end, so there was a wildlife smuggling ring run by a mainland Chinese guy who was in the Philippines illegally in a place called Palawan. We put this warehouse under surveillance and eventually got enough evidence to get a search warrant. Went in there with the local an organisation called PCSD, which was a government, the governor's private sort of wildlife rescue centre. So we went in with them and ended up making some arrests. And there was one, most of the pangolin were dead. There was one that was alive. And so we got this live pangolin, took it to a little rehabilitation centre, and I think it was there for about 3 weeks. And then the boys got to go and release it back into the wild, which is pretty cool. That's one of the neat things. I've got these are hardcore military guys, and you've got this guy with a little tear down his eyes. He's getting to go and release one of these little things. Similar thing happened with the dolphin. Like when my team managed to rescue that dolphin out of captivity in Indonesia, there were genuine tears from these very hardcore guys that you think, well, these two things don't add up here. You've got a SEAL Team 6 guy and he's crying.
Hey, Pete, this has been an amazing conversation. I mean, to be honest with you, I thought when we jumped on board, we might talk about the kind of, the snake bite and stuff for a half hour and then get on to things about Earthrace and where you are now and the 80 gill and sea shepherd and whaling. But actually, it feels like, as often happens in this conversation, it's gone exactly where it's meant to go. And we've talked about what's meant to be talked about. And we've sort of come to them. Just to let you know, the reason I asked about ocean conservation in Namibia is there guys who run around Namibia and they freed the seals from fishing line. And I had them on. I had them on here at the end of last year. They're an amazing group in Namibia doing that kind of stuff. But look, I wanted to ask you one question. It's quite specific based on what you've just said, because what you've just said is really challenging. Kind of like, what are you doing? Like, so I'm sitting here thinking, here I am in Dunedin, sitting in my studio, and there's a price to pay for this somewhere. So I kind of want to say to you, if I give you a scenario, of your average Joe or Jane, let's say that there are, let's say that it's a Jane, just for the argument's sake, and she's a receptionist for a medium to large company, a pretty middle of the road life, middle of the road job, no disrespect in that, but she's doing her stuff. She's working 9 to 5, she's got her family, she's got her kids. She hasn't really thought too much about this concept that you've just put out there about almost like paying back the world for what you've got, or paying back the world for where you are. If someone's never thought of that before, and I've never thought of it before the way you've just worded it, what can that person do? So I guess what I'm asking you is, what can we do in general as a step one towards thinking about paying back the world, the earth, nature, someone else for where we're at? What's one step we can take in that direction?
The first answer to this never goes down well in New Zealand. You need to eat less meat and eat less dairy. The planet pays such a huge price for us to eat meat. And I run the ship here. We've got about 8 or 10 crew on here at the moment. And I don't say to the crew, you cannot eat meat, but I'm trying to encourage them, you need to eat less meat, because every kilo of meat that has taken up so much land, so much water, so much of the world's resource. But that's a tough thing to argue in New Zealand. Really? You want me to give up my bacon kind of thing? But it's not unrealistic. Even doing your, meat-free Monday, you cut down on your meat and you are starting to make a difference. And the same for dairy. In some ways, when I look at the people who have a very low environmental footprint, it becomes part of their life. It's not just about the meat. It's what's the size of their car, and do they fly around the world twice a year, or do they just take one holiday a year? When I live in New Zealand, I don't have a car. I just hitchhike. And in fact, my daughter wrote this lovely article the other day about me, and she said she was embarrassed at one stage with her dad who didn't have a car, and she kind of got a bit ridiculed at school. But it's kind of like, my footprint is not perfect. I end up having to fly to places because of it. But I don't have a car. I don't eat a lot of meat. I don't eat a lot of dairy. And I contribute with the missions and work that my team does. But the hard thing for your average person, you talked before about, Jane, who's sitting in her office job or whatever. It's you're talking about a lifestyle change to think about what you buy. For example, you go and buy yourself. We just got a new washing machine and a dryer on the boat. The dryer is a heat pump. It's like 45% more efficient than a normal dryer. It costs a bit more, but that's okay. Like, we're a conservation group. Sometimes you got 25 rangers on here. It's pissing with rain. We need to dry their clothes, and we've got this heat pump dryer. So it's sort of become, what I'm asking is for it to become this lifestyle change where you start thinking not just about the meat, you're just thinking about everything you do. You're buying a new car. Does it really need to be a 6-cylinder? Can you buy a 4? All of these things, your footprint, you sitting down there in Dunedin, there's an accumulation of your food and your house, and every time you renovate your house and get rid of that, and have you got insulation, your footprint is an accumulation of thousands of decisions that you've made. What I'm saying is I want you to start questioning those decisions a little bit more and saying, hey, do I really need that? Maybe I don't. Maybe I'll buy a smaller one. Maybe I'll do away with it. Maybe I don't go on holiday this year. Maybe I'll just hang out in Dunedin. I think worst places to be, mate.
I tell you what, there's thanks to COVID as well, which is another whole conversation for another day. I think a lot of New Zealanders have followed at least the holidaying part of what you're saying and have seen more of this country and had a smaller footprint than perhaps they would have had years before. But then in saying that they haven't taken their $10,000 international trip, they've bought a spa pool, so maybe their footprint's still where it was, just in a different area. Who knows?
Yep, yeah, indeed.
Hey, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you, Pete. Thank you so much for giving us some time. I'm aware that you're probably being sought after by many media outlets at the moment based on your experiences in Costa Rica. How much longer are you in Costa Rica for? Like, how long before you're given the all clear to kind of get more than 500 meters away from the hospital?
I reckon within a week.
Okay.
I'll be all good to. If we in fact in a week we get this anti-poaching dog arrived, so we've got a 2-week handover period. So myself and one other guy on my crew, we're going to become dog handlers, and this will be a service we provide. So that happens in a week. The dog arrives. Hopefully by then I've got them all clear, back in the jungle.
And then how much of that 12 months in Costa Rica have you got to go?
In fact, the contract runs through till August, but the meetings we've had with the minister just recently are basically saying, can you guys stay through Christmas? So I think that's probably more likely, and then Christmas will head south, maybe Galapagos or something like that. So
2021 in Costa Rica, it sounds like. And just because I've mentioned it, not that it's a big driver of this conversation, what is happening with COVID in Costa Rica at the moment? What's happening on the ground?
So when I was in the hospital, they would announce on the intercom every time there was a COVID patient came in on they called it the red ramp or Ruaha Rampa. And on Saturday night, it was like every 15 minutes. They had a patient coming in with corona. So, and I remember talking to one of the doctors. They've stopped all elective surgery, and their ICU beds are all full. They have no spare ICU beds, and they've got all these. They've set up so different rooms that were part of wards that might have been doing other things like elective surgery. They've been converted to corona places now, and yeah. Costa Rica initially did quite well, but in recent times they're struggling with it. They're definitely struggling.
177,000 total cases, 2,300 total deaths. Recovered 136,000, so there's around 40,000 current cases. So yeah, that's.
So you put that in perspective.
5 million, about the same size.
As New Zealand.
Yeah. 5.1 million. And so 40,000
Yep.
cases. Wow. And if
Puts
you,
it in perspective, eh?
and to put it in perspective for people who don't know, in New Zealand, where's N? There we go. New Zealand has had, about just over 2,000 total cases. And that was that, and Costa Rica was 140, over 100,000, wasn't it? Gosh. 177,000 in Costa Rica. New Zealand has had 2,000. So,
but you look at the deaths, 22 or something deaths in New Zealand.
Yep.
Costa Rica's, huge number of deaths now.
Terrifying.
I think there was a guy just come on the boat before, a guy Abraham, who helps us out. He's got a property with a freshwater spring. In fact, this is where we were anchored up when I got bitten by the snake. We back into his property and we get spring water and fill up the boat. He was just saying he had a mate of his that died of corona 2 weeks ago. Lasted 6 days in the hospital, gone.
Wow. Well, it's a terrible thing. And 2021, hopefully 2022, because I think for a lot of people they've got to be aware that this coronavirus thing is with us this year as well. I was a bit disappointed to see everyone going, oh, New Year's Eve 2020, good to get rid of that. Yeah, look, there's a lot. I mean, I think I heard yesterday, I could probably have a look actually. I think I heard yesterday someone say that there's been 3 peaks in America. One of them was 30,000 cases a day, and then their second peak came along, which was 60,000 cases in a day. And then if I go to yesterday for America, 216,000 cases yesterday in America.
That is unbelievable, isn't it? Unbelievable.
So
it's funny. I've had a few arguments with people over this. Like people say, "Oh, it's just the flu." I had it only lasted a week, and it was all good, sort of thing. I've given up even arguing with people like that. All these COVID deniers and people who won't wear their masks. There's one thing they do have here: the people are very obedient and compliant. Like they all wear their masks. You pop them down here, you won't see anyone who doesn't have a mask on. So at least on that side, Costa Rica's been quite good.
But that's even kind of more terrifying that there's been that many cases and that many deaths when the country is compliant. Imagine if it wasn't compliant. I guess what you'd have is another America. So,
yep, absolutely.
Hey, Pete, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for jumping in and joining us. And as I always say to all the people who come into this podcast, if you're ever wanting to chat again, our door is always open. Tell us what's going on. Tell us what's happening in your world. We'll have you any day of the week. We'd love to have you back on board. And obviously you're a long ways away from New Zealand, both in physical distance and time to get back here. But obviously if you're ever down in Otipoti, any kind of this area, love to have you in studio as well. But it's been a whole lot of fun. It's been challenging, and I'm taking away stuff from what you've said today about thinking about my footprint and thinking about making it smaller and thinking about, I like the idea of manageable changes. I think that's a better way to try and convince people rather than saying everyone has to be vegan today. The meat-free Monday is a great idea, or rather than a V8, get a V6, or rather than get a V8.6, get a 2-litre, or rather than get a 2-litre, get a 1600cc car, or whatever it is, and making incremental changes for the better.
There you go.
Hey,
one final thing before I go.
Yep.
My medical bill is $30,000. We've raised 20 grand. Anyone out there who would like to help us out, go to earthrace.net and click on the donate button. Anyone who can help us out, that would be fantastic.
I think there's also on your Facebook page, I think I saw, on your Facebook page, the GoFundMe is there.
Stopped working. I just got an
really?
email about half an hour ago from someone saying, hey, your GoFundMe thing's not working at the moment. So the link's broken or something or other. So the best is they go to the website and just click on the donate button.
You're correct. I've just clicked on the one on your Facebook page and I got this that came up, Error 404. So you're correct. So okay, so go to the Earthrace site, which is this one, earthrace.net.
And you see if you make a donation.
Yep, got it.
Top right of that.
Right there. Hey, Pete, thanks again, mate. This has been a lot of fun. And I'm hoping that more people know about what you're doing now. And I'm glad you survived, and am inspired to hear that, when people are looking at that final step, if people are facing that final breath, so to speak, if they can go out being happy to go out because they've contributed and they've succeeded and they've been happy with what they've given back, then that's a good place to be. I'm glad you didn't have to. So I'm glad you didn't have to go out. I'm glad you didn't have to go out happy, but it's pretty inspiring and thought for all of us to think about that. There's that old saying that you never get a businessman on his deathbed going, I wish I'd spent another hour at the office. It's always things like, I wish I'd spent another hour with my kids, or, in your case, another hour, saving pangolins or whatever it is.
There you go.
All right,
anyway,
Pete.
mate, look, I appreciate you having us on the show, and I appreciate you giving us a platform to come in and talk about what we're doing and people's footprints and all that. And it's fantastic to have people like you that are willing to go out and give us a little bit of airtime. So I do appreciate it. Thanks very
Anytime.
much, eh?
Anytime. All the best. Be safe.
All right, bro. Take care.